What's more likely, the SEC gets 14 teams into the tournament again, or that Florida is for the second time a back-to-back national champion?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts here on this Friday show. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Schade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. I want to thank all of you who've made this show your first listen or watch of the day. Give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and remind you all that you can listen to this show ad-free on Amazon Music. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. NFL games starting this weekend, actually starting Thursday, and a game on Friday as well. You can visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bet now. It is September, and that means, folks, we are starting our conference preview series. If you've been listening to the show, we've already started our team preview series a couple weeks ago. We've been doing some individual shows about some of the best teams in college basketball. But now, every Friday from now until the start of the college basketball season, we will be doing a conference preview, talk about the power conferences, as well as some of the better mid-major conferences in college basketball. And Isaac, we are starting with a bang today, the conference that set the record for the most teams in the NCAA tournament ever last year. Oh, by the way, they also had the national champion Florida Gators. And Isaac, I think that's the perfect place to start. Those two topics were some of the biggest storylines in all of college basketball last year, and we're looking ahead to them this year. So Isaac, let's start with the simple question. Can the SEC do what had never been done before last year and put 14 or more teams into the NCAA tournament this upcoming season? Because that was unprecedented, but there's still a whole ton of talent in this league heading into the 25-26 season.
It's a great question, Andy, and it's where I need to make a differentiation between can they and will they, because can they? Yes, they did it last year, obviously, as you said, for the first time ever. I think it's part of what we're going to see with the bloat of conference size. It's just part of that. Thankfully, we didn't go up to 72 or 76 teams yet, because then it would be a more likely scenario. Will they get 14 or more teams again is a wildly different question. More than 14, not a chance, because LSU and South Carolina exist. And with all due apologies to those teams, Andy, I do not think they will. Let me say more definitively, no. SEC will not get 14 teams in again. Will they get double digits? That is, to me, almost a certainty with the amount of talent and the coaching and all of that. But I think part of it is it's like the SEC doesn't exist in a vacuum. I don't know if you know this, Andy, but there are 30 other conferences in Division I college basketball. We'll get back to 31 other conferences next year with the return of the long-lost Pac-12. And so you got to consider those things as well, right? For example, I think the ACC is going to be a little bit back better this year. We got like all of that, for example, is a factor. 14, I don't see it. And obviously we'll make our picks on how many they get later, but my answer is no. Now, to your other question that you asked, and if you want to cycle back around to the NCAA tournament side of it, great. Does Florida have a realistic chance to repeat as national champs? Quite frankly, and even as wildly unpredictable as the tournament is, I think that's more likely than getting 14 teams in the tournament again.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think that I don't think either are super likely. It's really hard to repeat as national champions. It's only happened 3 times in the history of the sport. Duke back in the early 90s. Florida, of course, did it in 06 and 07, and then UConn did it just a few years ago. But it's not something that happens all of that often, even in eras, especially now where there's more good teams and there's more money in the sport than there's ever been before. This is just not something that happens all that often. And so I think for me, Florida has a lot of talent on their roster. I think that they are a contender for a national championship. But if it's Florida or the field, I am absolutely unquestionably taking the field. And similarly for the number of teams in the NCAA tournament, I don't think 10 is crazy. I don't think even 12 is crazy. But if I was setting an over under, it's not 13 and a half. It's 10 and a half or maybe 11 and a half. That's where it's oh, okay. I could see it being 10, 11, 12, something like that. We'll get to that later in the show, our specific picks, but 14 is really, really tough, and it required a lot of things to go kind of fall their way. And I think that this conference is looking at trying to find a way to make sure that their net rankings are high, and that, we're seeing some teams like Oklahoma schedule a more challenging non-conference than they've had in the past, because they know that, hey, it's going to be tough for us to win, half of our games in the SEC. But if we pick up a few good non-conference wins, maybe that puts us in a position where, we're 18th in the net, even if we're barely 500. So I'm curious if gaming the net system will work for this conference or not, but I'd be very, very surprised if they got 14, just like I would be surprised if Florida won it back to back, although both things I think are technically possible.
Yeah. Andy, on the Florida side of things, obviously for those who pay attention, you probably are aware, just 3 times in the modern college basketball history have we had back-to-back champs. And by modern history, we refer to that as the era when we've had 64 or more teams in the tournament. So that would be the 84-85 season through the present, which, by the way, I was 1 year old at that point. And Andy, obviously the other 3 iterations being Duke 91 and 92, Florida 06 and 07, and then UConn 23 and 24. So Andy, what's crazy about this is were Florida to be able to repeat, they would be just the 4th time ever, but they would own half of those back to back. I mean, that's and it's the fact that it's not a traditional blue blood in Kansas or Duke, Kentucky, Carolina, whatever, even UConn, whom now we consider a blue blood. I think we would have to start thinking about at that point, would Florida now be ascending into that kind of status, and something we got to think about. The other wild side of that to me, Andy, would be that not only would it be the 4th ever back to back, but that it's happened in the last 4 seasons where we get 2 of them. Just crazy stuff. And I love the anomalies of sports like that.
Yeah, I don't think that means anything other than it's just a weird quirk, but it would certainly require us to discuss that more. Like, is there a reason that this has happened twice in the last 5 years or not? And I think that's a fun thing that we may end up having to discuss. But like I said, I think it's more likely, certainly, that Florida is not the national champion, even if I do really like the way this roster has come together. But Isaac, want to move on and talk about some coaching stuff in the SEC, because there weren't that many coaching changes this past year. There were 2. Rodney Terry is out at Texas. He was let go, and they brought in Sean Miller. Sean Miller leaving his alma mater for the 2nd time in his career. He went from Xavier to Arizona, back to Xavier. Now he is going to Texas. So we'll see how he's able to do there. And then Buzz Williams out at Texas A&M, taking that job at Maryland, while Bucky McMillan, Buckyball, comes in from Samford. If you are a listener of the show throughout the offseason, you know that we are very hyped about Texas A&M and what Bucky is able to do for that Aggies program. We'll talk much more about both these programs later in the show. But there's also a huge group of coaches that are relatively new. And this surprised me, Isaac, when we were looking at this. There are not that many coaches who have been in the SEC for more than a decade. In fact, there's only 2. There's only 2 of them that have been in this conference for longer than a decade. Bruce Pearl, and I told you this before we recorded, I wouldn't have guessed Bruce Pearl was the longest tenured coach in the SEC. I would have smashed Rick Barnes. That would have been my answer 100%. Barnes did just sign a lifetime contract, so he's going to be there for a while at Tennessee. But yeah, I was surprised by that. Most of these coaches have been there less than 5 years. The only other coach longer than 5 years at his SEC stop is Nate Oates at Alabama. Really fun group of coaches. I'm really excited to see how this plays out this year.
I don't know, Andy. Rick Barnes might be there for a while, but somebody else on this SEC coaching list once upon a time had a lifetime contract, and now he's not at that same school. So there you go, for what it's worth. Yeah, dude, it's crazy that when we look at this, which also, Andy, I'm very sad to have discovered in preparing this that the coaches database website that I always go to look at all this is gone now. I don't know if you've seen that. So I'm super bummed. So I had to go put this all together annoyingly. So, but it's fun. I love the research, whatever. That Andy, only 3 coaches have been at their I almost said alma maters, at their schools for 5 or more years. That's crazy to process. And literally 6 of the 16 coaches are in year 4 this year. That's absolutely crazy. And so it's really interesting because we've talked so much about how great the SEC is, and a lot of it is because of the coaching, but a lot of them don't have what I'll call just deep roots at their schools yet. But it seems like because of the SEC money, because of the SEC success, we might see a lot of these coaches hang out and be at their schools for a good long while.
Yeah, and I think the funny thing is that the only coach who could ascend into that 5-year club next year is Porter Moser at Oklahoma. He's the only one. He's entering his 5th year. And I think that the last topic here is the hot seat. And I don't think there's a ton of coaches who are like on a scalding hot seat in the SEC, but if Porter Moser doesn't get this Oklahoma team into the NCAA tournament, I think that he might be on the hottest seat in the conference. Obviously, there's some other coaches who have had some challenges. Matt McMahon at LSU, Lamont Paris at South Carolina, but they've also had some success as well. And I think that may keep them there a little bit longer. But yeah, those SEC teams don't tend to have a lot of patience. But yeah, I don't think there's a ton of, again, like obvious movement going to happen after this year, but I'm keeping an eye on Porter Moser at Oklahoma. I think he's a great coach, but I'm not sure how much longer the Sooners will put up with not being in the big dance.
Florida and Kentucky, Andy, are the favorites in the SEC ahead of the 25-26 season, but who else could compete for an SEC title this year? We're going to give you our tiers, our dark horse candidates, and more coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about DoorDash, y'all, it's almost the weekend. Honestly, I consider Friday the weekend already, but it's time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving money every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For Tennessee, Colton Hood delivered in a big way. Hood recovered a fumble and scampered 22 yards for a first quarter touchdown, against Syracuse in a big win for the Vols last weekend. When the pressure was on, Hood came through. No hesitation, no delay. And just like Hood delivered for the Vols, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday that you order. Stack it all up this season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday, keep the streak alive, fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply, and this promo period runs through November 18th.
Folks, Mazda crafts cars for those who choose to do more than simply move. They follow what moves them every time they drive. And that's what makes Mazda stand out. They go beyond safety, style, and performance to deliver a driving experience that feels alive in every detail. Mazda offers more than safety, but as of August 2025, it's won more than 2025 IIHS Top Safety Pick Awards than anybody else. And as an athlete focuses on every detail, Mazda does the same, from metallic accents to hand-stitched Napa leather. You can feel it in the moment you get behind the wheel. The smooth handling, intuitive controls, and standard all-wheel drive in every crossover SUV. Whether it's a quick drive to practice or a weekend road trip, Mazda makes even everyday drives feel special. It's the small details that make the big plays. And just like there's more to every player, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda. Move and be moved. All right, folks, Locked On College Basketball here. Andy, Patton, Isaac Schade, still talking SEC preview, the first of our conference preview series here before the upcoming college basketball season. We always do our tiers here, talking about kind of basically ranking each of the teams in the conference and separating them out, tier 1, tier 2, to tier 3. Isaac made the tier list this time, so I'm going to let him read it out to you, and we're going to kind of banter about where we think these teams belong this upcoming season. Isaac, hit us. What do you got?
Andy, I'm a big fan of tiers when I'm drafting in fantasy football, so it's tier season for me in a big way. Here's the thing. The bookends of this were very easy for me with two teams on either bookend. It was the middle where it gets a little confusing. Andy, I have Florida and Kentucky alone in tier 1, and then everyone else is in 3 other tiers, 2, 3, and 4. And then I wrote in our notes tier 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, left them all blank, and then an ellipsis. And then I put LSU and South Carolina in tier 1000, just because to me that, like, they're playing basketball, but it's just, to me, they don't really have a chance of being competitive at the level the others are, which is the same as last year, unfortunately, for those 2 schools. Tier 2, I have 4 teams in this tier. I don't really have them in a specific order, but I think these 4 teams are just below Florida and Kentucky, but feel to me to have a clear demarcation line above the other 8 that were not in that bottom tier. And to me, Andy, that is Tennessee, Alabama, Auburn, and Arkansas. In order you want to go with, I like those 4 teams above this next 8. And Andy, I almost just said, I pull these next 8 out of a hat, but I did, for the sake of the argument of the conversation of the podcast, put them into tier 3 and 4. So tier 3, I have Ole Miss, Vandy, Mizzou, and A&M. Tier 4, and it was interesting for me to split A&M and Texas, but Texas, Mississippi State, UGA, and Oklahoma. And Andy, where I would expect to get the most pushback from you is in these middle two tiers where these 8 teams fall, because I feel like anything could happen from those 8. I feel more confident about the top 2 tiers and the bottom tier.
Yeah, I would feel the same way. Tier 1 is pretty easy for me, Florida and Kentucky. I think that's absolutely right. I was like, is there a team I'd put up there to have it be tier 1 have 3 teams and tier 2 have 3 teams? But I couldn't pick, which I think means that they're all in the right spot. Like, I don't think it's obvious that Tennessee is better than Bama, Auburn, or Arkansas, or for any other order there. I think all 4 of those teams will compete to get a double bye in the SEC tournament, where I think Florida and Kentucky are the most obvious candidates to do so. So yeah, I'm good with those top 2 tiers. I'm good with the tier 1,000 for LSU, South Carolina. Sorry to those 2 teams. It's just kind of where they're at right now. But I would order tiers 3 and 4 quite a bit differently. But again,
okay, bring it.
The difference between 7 and 14 in this conference just doesn't feel that significant. I'm good with Ole Miss at the top, although I'm skeptical a little bit of this roster. You're relying a lot on AJ Storr, and he's not proven to be particularly reliable throughout his career. So I'm a little skeptical there, but I like Malik Dia a lot, and I think that team's going to do some good stuff. So I'm good with them there. I'm a little bit lower on Vandy, and I'm higher on A&M. I would have A&M probably next on this tier behind Ole Miss, maybe even ahead of Ole Miss. Honestly, they're going to be really close in that conversation. And then for me, I would have Oklahoma higher. You have them at the very bottom of tier 4. I might have them all the way up in tier 3. Nigel Pack is a quality veteran guard addition for Porter Moser. I think he's a good coach, and I know their teams have struggled getting into conference play, but I think that this team's going to be a bit more battle tested with a tougher non-conference slate. They got some good veteran guys, some young guys coming onto that team. So I'd have them a little bit higher. I'd probably have Texas a little bit lower. I'm not quite sure how all the pieces are going to fit together for Sean Miller on that team. I'm concerned about their depth outside of their starting 5. So I'd probably have Texas closer to the bottom. I'd probably have Oklahoma in tier 3 with A&M moving up a few spots. But again, I think the difference in these teams is really minor. Like, there's just not a big spread, which is why picking how many teams are going to make the dance is tough for me, because it's going to be more than 7, but it's going to be less than 14, which means somewhere between these 2 tiers is that line of which teams are going to make it and which teams are not going to make it. And I think you can make an argument for all 8 of these teams, but also if you told me any of these 8 teams didn't make the tournament, that probably the only team that I think that would genuinely surprise me is Ole Miss, which is why I have them. I agree with you having them at the top, but every other team, it wouldn't stun me if they didn't make it either.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting when we get to the end of segment 3 and we actually make our NCAA tournament picks, who we choose to leave out and put in. Andy, clear that Florida and Kentucky are our favorites here. Who in your mind, and maybe you just kind of alluded to it in the way you were talking about this team, but who in your mind is a dark horse in the SEC?
Yeah, I think it's Texas A&M, and I think dark horse again. If we're taking a dark horse team to win the SEC, I would probably go more like Auburn or Arkansas.
Yes.
But a dark horse to like be a top 4 seed, like Texas A&M would be my pick to be like, that's the team that nobody's expecting to be a double bye team in the conference tournament that I think could do it. Not only am I a believer in Bucky McMillan and his coaching style and his analytics based approach and the press and everything that they do, this roster is just really, really good. Pop Isaacs, Mackenzie Mbako coming in out of the transfer portal. They got a ton of other great players on that roster. I think that he did a great job of assessing talent, of putting together a roster that fits his style. I think some of these players are going to get a really great change of scenery and be in an environment that's better for them than their previous stops. It may take Bucky a year or 2. It may not happen right away, but this roster combined with what I think about him as a coach is the reason that I'm pretty high on this team. And again, don't necessarily think I'm gambling on them to be a top 4 team in the conference, but if I'm picking a dark horse that's going to do it, they're my pick. And frankly, by a pretty easy margin for me.
Yeah. The talent is there. Like I don't know what I feel like. Rylan Griffin has a big bounce back from last year.
Great call.
Yeah. And so I think if you compare that with Pop and with McKenzie, our guy Fed's there, dude. What do you want from us? Bucky loves his double named players. All right, Andy, let's pick our regular season and conference tournament champs for the SEC. Who you got for the regular season?
I'm going Florida for the regular season. I'm a little concerned about Florida's depth outside of their starting lineup. I think that's a question mark for them, but they got some young players coming in who should fill valuable roles for them right away. Obviously, it would have been huge for them to have been able to keep Denzel Aberdeen, but Boogie Fland and Xavion Lee are both very, very talented. How exactly they fit together will be an interesting thing to watch this year, but Todd Golden has done exceptional with 2 ball handlers in the past, and I think that this team is more than capable of doing that, especially with Tommy Howe kind of sliding down to the 3. I think that's going to be a really, really fun fit for this team. So I got Florida in the regular season, but I actually got Auburn winning the conference tournament. I think that for Auburn, this is a really talented roster that I think it might take a little bit for some of the pieces to come together, but I really like what this I think this team's going to be very dangerous by the time we get into late February and March with Keyshawn Hall, with Keyshawn Murphy. They got a really great D2 transfer and Elijah Freeman, who's already like getting some NBA draft buzz, which is very rare for somebody from that level. I could see him just absolutely popping off by the time we get to that point in the season. And then you got big shot to Todd Pettiford, who I think is going to be a great player this year. So I got Auburn winning that conference tournament and kind of making some noise heading into the big dance.
Andy, for my regular season, it's funny you mentioned Denzel Aberdeen because I'm going with Kentucky, his new school, to win the regular season. A lot of this is asterisk, get Jaden Quaintance back quickly. But you know what? He doesn't have to be back till like January for them to win the regular season SEC. And so until that point, I do have front court questions for Kentucky, but I think their wing and backcourt depth and talent is very, very strong. And so I think, matched with the lack of perceived depth at Florida, I'm going to go with Kentucky there. However, come conference tournament time, I am going with the Gators to repeat and get this bad boy. We know exactly what the front court is for Florida because we saw this exact same group last year. The difference is the backcourt. And if there's time that's needed to gel between Boogie and Xavion Lee and others, by conference tournament time, I think they're going to be rolling. And so give me the Gators to win the conference tournament.
Well, Isaac, picking just 5 players for our all-SEC team, this felt just completely unfair. Like, it was unbelievably challenging to just pick 5 players in this tremendously deep conference, but we did our very best. So we're going to discuss that and finally give you our picks for which teams we think are going to go dancing out of the SEC this upcoming season. All that coming up here in just a second. Hey, college basketball fans, are you still paying full price for gas? Because you can stop leaving money behind and get real cash back every time you fill up with the free Upside app. Simply download the free Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and start earning cash at the pump today. Use my limited time promo code FOOTBALL and get an extra 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. You could make up to $300 a year just from buying the gas that you already needed. At first, I thought this was too good to be true, but it's completely legit. Real people are getting paid just to make their daily commute, and you can too. Plus, you can cash out anytime to your bank account, to PayPal, or you can get an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. I've been using Upside for a couple of years now, cashed it out not that long ago for a trip my wife and I took up to Seattle. It was fantastic to have a little extra cash for that. So folks, do not let this offer drive on by. Download the free Upside app now using our limited time promo code FOOTBALL for a limited time 25 cents per gallon bonus. That's promo code FOOTBALL. Disclaimer, offers vary by user and location. Go to upside.com for terms and conditions.
This episode's also brought to you by our good friends at FanDuel. The NFL season is not almost here. It is here. We had a game last night. There's another one tonight, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and guess what, Andy Patton? If you win, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. That's probably the highest I've seen that in our FanDuel reads. One of the great things about FanDuel is that it fits however you like to bet. If it's player props, building a same-game parlay, maybe you even jump in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game even more exciting. So whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup, it's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more spice and energy to your Sunday. Speaking of which, tonight's NFL game, the Chiefs, 2 hours north of me, are 3-point favorites over the Chargers again tonight. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. Again, that's FanDuel.com. Andy, it's time for some preseason superlatives for the SEC. We're going to give our first team all SEC. And look, folks, we don't mess around. None of this 10-player stuff. We go with 5. We hold ourselves to it. So really, Andy, the conversation is more about who we didn't pick maybe than who we did. Something we also always try to do is we don't allow ourselves to pick I can't remember, Andy, if you got on board with this or not,
Mm-hmm.
not picking two players from the same team on the first team.
I did get on board with this.
Okay, good. So neither of us have two players from the same team on our first team. Andy, you go first. Who's your top 5?
Yeah, the easiest pick for me was one of the biggest returners in the entire conference for Kentucky. That would be Otega Oweh. He was phenomenal last year. He's going to be phenomenal again this year. There's not really much more that needs to be said there. Next is Jacoby Gillespie, one of the best transfers in the conference, coming to Tennessee. Just a really great Rick Barnes style guard. He's a little undersized, but he gets tons of steals. Phenomenal outside shooter. I think he's going to be excellent for that Tennessee club. Then I got Josh Hubbard at Mississippi State. I don't think that the Bulldogs are going to be all that great, but Hubbard was one of the most prolific scorers in the conference last year, and I think there's no reason to think he's not going to be again this year. Could be a 20-point per game guy, and it's going to be hard to ignore him on a first team, even if that team, is not in the top 7, 8, 10 of the conference. And then for me, I feel like I have to pick somebody from Florida, and I think there's a couple of great options it could be. I think it could be really pretty much anybody in that starting 5, but I'm going to go with Alex Condon. He's been just a tremendous rebounder. We saw him develop as a scorer last year. I think he's going to have a phenomenal season for the Gators. And then my 5th pick is definitely my dark horse candidate here, and we've talked about him already, Mackenzie Mbako. Again, I'm sticking with the Texas A&M love. I don't think Mbako was properly utilized really at all at Indiana, and I think that the skill set and talent we saw it. It's not like it's completely hidden. We saw glimpses of it at Indiana. And I think in this system, and with an opportunity to really get the ball in his hands and do a lot of damage, I think Mbako is going to have a phenomenal season. And if A&M makes some real noise in this conference, he's going to get plenty of attention for that.
Andy, if I was sending a text about Mackenzie Mbako and Bucky McMillan being together, it would be like the handshake emoji that people do, because it's like, as you said, it's a perfect match, and I'm all on board with that. Of my 5, we had 2 that were the same. I have become so enamored with Jacoby Gillespie. I love everything he did at Maryland last year, and he's now coming home, folks. For those who aren't aware, this is like a homecoming to Knoxville, Tennessee, stepping in for Zakai Ziegler in Knoxville there for Rick Barnes. And man, I just think it's going to be phenomenal. I also had Otega Oweh from Kentucky. And then where I started to differ, Andy, is I thought long and hard about Josh Hubbard. He was an all-SEC player last year. I can't remember second or third team, but I actually kind of in that same slot, I thought I would go with Tahad Pettiford, because I think he's going to have a similar output at Auburn. I think he's going to be asked to do a lot more this year. And so I think that sophomore leap and statistical output for a better team are going to do that. Funny, you went with Condon. I started to, and then I changed my mind and went Tommy Haupt. I think that his glow up toward the end of the year spills over this year. And the question, my one hesitation with it, is his ability to settle into that small forward, that 3 role, that wing role we think he'll probably start at this year. That's the one bugaboo. And then my kind of guy in the similar vein to your Mbako pick was Mark Mitchell, who was an all-SEC player last year as well. I think he'll just have another big year at Mizzou. But Andy, all of that said, we didn't go with LeBaron Philon. We didn't go with Boogie Fland. There's a whole laundry list of names that we had thought about as being, like, for example, I talked about Jaden Quaintance earlier. If he was going to be fully healthy, I think he would be on my list, right? But it sounds like he's not going to be around until December or January, so I don't know that with him. Nate Ament could just blow up and be, and we'll talk about him more in a second, but there's just so many names. Nigel Pack, if he's healthy and ready. So SEC, you could go with anybody.
Yeah. Malik Diaz is another name I would mention here as a guy that I think I considered strongly. I'm sure you considered him strongly. I know you're high on him, but it would not shock me if he's in this conversation as well. But again, can only pick 5. It's tough to narrow it down there, but there's, especially in a conference like this where there's just so much talent. But Isaac, want to move on and look at some of the specific award superlatives and our projections there. I have a feeling that we're going to have some similarities, at least for player of the year, especially since we had 2 guys that overlapped on our top 5 lists. Isaac, who do you got for player of the year in this conference?
For player of the year, I strongly debated between those 2 guys that we overlapped on, Gillespie and Otega Oweh. And ultimately I went with the returner, because that felt like the more, if I was betting on this, that's the more likely thing. We've already seen it. We know what he can do at Kentucky. And so I just thought Oweh is going to be the best player on one of the very best teams in the nation. So that's what I'm going with.
I went with Gillespie, not to just be contrarian, but I do think that it's going to be one of those top two players. I think Gillespie is going to put up huge numbers. We've seen Tennessee have guys just absolutely pop off like Dalton Connected, and I think Gillespie is going to have a great season on both sides of the ball for Tennessee. So that's why I went with him. How about let's go Coach of the Year here? And look, I'm consistent, so I'm going to stay consistent. I'm going with Bucky McMillan, and first year coach it's rare, but one thing that you and I have talked about a lot, Isaac, is it's usually not, especially in power conferences, it's usually not the team that finishes number one in the conference who wins Coach of the Year, unless it was very unexpected. It's often a team that went from like mediocre to much better. Texas A&M was obviously pretty good last year, but for Bucky McMillan to come over from Samford, a small school, to rebuild a roster completely, if they finish top 7, top 8 in this conference, I think that might be enough for him to win Coach of the Year. You could quibble on whether that should be enough, especially if like Kentucky finishes first or whatever. But I'm going to continue to stake my claim on A&M, and I'm going to pick Bucky here.
I love that, man. And the logic makes a ton of sense for me. Last year, it was Bruce Pearl, and I'm going to go with Mark Pope this year. I think he probably would have been in higher consideration last year were it not for just Auburn boat racing people like they did till the end of the season, were it not for Florida. Obviously, this was in before they won the national championship, but they had done enough where even Todd Golden probably, well, actually, given everything that happened last year, maybe not. But I'm going with Pope this year because I think he did so much in year one, and I think takes another step forward this year for Kentucky, and it's Kentucky. So Mark Pope makes a ton of sense. Andy, a lot of conferences now just do newcomer of the year, kind of combining transfer and freshman. We like to keep that separate. So who is your pick for transfer?
Well, I'm going with Gillespie. I think it's kind of the obvious pick here. I think if I was going to do an honorable mention, since I already gave Gillespie the Player of the Year award, also not going to be a surprise to those of you listening, Mbako would be my pick for that. I think Pop Isaacs is somebody I'd consider. Nigel Pack is somebody that I would consider here. Quaintance, if he gets healthy, is somebody I'd consider here. There's a lot of phenomenal transfers coming into this conference, but if I'm picking Gillespie as Player of the Year, it's hard to ignore him for Transfer of the Year as well.
I am going with Jacoby Gillespie because I didn't pick him as my Player of the Year, so I get to utilize that. All right, Andy, Freshman of the Year. I'll just hold on to this one and then pass it to you. I'm going to go with Nate Ament. He's the guy that is being mentioned just behind what most people are seeing as that big three of Darren Peterson, AJ DeBansett, and Cam Boozer. But to hear Rick Barnes talk about it, to hear some others talk about it, there's a world in which his ceiling could be right up there with that big three. And if he pops at Tennessee, if he and Gillespie, who we're both high on, can form a good duo, man, Nate Ament could be that guy. All that said, even though John Calipari is in this conference and has all his usual dudes, Nate Ament is the guy for me.
Yeah, I'm also going with Nate Ament. I would mention Darius Acuff as an honorable mention here because I think he's going to have a great year for Coach Cal. We've seen what he does with young guards, and it's very, very regularly do they turn out to be outstanding. But Ament is the most talented freshman, and I think has a clear runway to have a big role for Tennessee this year.
All right, Andy, we had this conversation to start the show, but ultimately when it comes down to it, where are we going to each land on how many teams make the NCAA tournament from the SEC? Will it be 14 or will it be 2? I'm just kidding. It's not going to be 2.
I went with 11. I went with 11 teams here. And to me, again, when we kind of talked about that, like it feels like it's a little more than double digits, but it's going to be certainly hard to get all the way up to 14. So for me, the obvious ones, I went with Bama, Arkansas, Auburn, Florida, Kentucky. I also went with Tennessee, and then Missouri, Ole Miss, A&M. Obviously, I've been a big fan of them. I do think Oklahoma is going to get in this year under Moser, and then I also think Mississippi State's going to make it. They made it in last year as a 9 seed. I think they're going to be right around that group again this year, especially with Hubbard back. But that means that probably my most surprising cut would be Vanderbilt. I'm not sure about this roster. I think they have some pieces, but I'm not quite sure they're going to be able to hang enough to get in. And then Texas, I also have out in Sean Miller's first year, as well as Georgia, LSU, and South Carolina.
Andy, I'm also going with 11. Two left out obviously would be LSU and South Carolina. That's no surprise if you've watched the show. The top 2 tiers, Andy, those 6 teams, I feel very confident in those. It's these middle 8 teams, how successful they are, particularly in non-conference play, right? That's what we need to watch, is how does that play out. But for me, the ones I left out along with LSU and South Carolina are Mississippi State, Georgia, and Oklahoma. Georgia's the school of those 3 I feel most strongly on. Obviously they lose multiple key players, and that's a thing. But Mississippi State and Oklahoma, Oklahoma got that benefit of the doubt with their late season surge last year. And I know it's like about analytics and you don't let previous performance, but I feel like if they're in that same boat this year and it's a question, maybe the humanity in the selection committee can't help but keep that out. I hope Mississippi State doesn't miss because I love Josh Hubbard and Chris Jansen, want to see them in. But look, I had to pick somebody, and that's who I'm going with.
I like it. The four teams that you and I are a little bit off on there, Oklahoma, Mississippi State, Vandy, Texas, going to be feels like they're going to be teams that every time we're refreshing, whenever we're refreshing those bubble watches, we're going to see those teams showing up. Last four in, first four out. Joe Lunardi is going to be banging them around a little bit. I think it's going to be fun to see kind of which of those four teams does make it on the right side, which ones maybe end up on the wrong side. There's going to be a lot of bubble teams in this conference. It's going to be fun.
All right. First conference preview in the books. We'll have one a week leading up to the season. We got 8 more that we are going to do. Thanks for being with us. If you've not subscribed to the show on video and audio, do that right now so you don't miss a second of Locked On College Basketball. If you've not joined the Locked On College Basketball Discord, you missing out. You need to join us. That link is in the show notes. Andy, as always, we got to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. Cheers to the McBruins. And until Monday, peace.